Basically, there's this inflammatory soup, that the organs are bathing in. So we're waking up to the fact that, at the cause of much of chronic disease is this visceral fat.
Hello and good evening. Welcome to today's program at the Commonwealth Club of California. I'm Patty James, co-chair with Dr. William Grant of the Nutrition, Food, and Wellness Member-Led Forum and chair of this program. So, my introductions. First is Dr. David Kessler. Dr. Kessler is the former FDA commissioner and had the rare distinction of being a bipartisan head of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration under both Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. A lawyer and pediatrician, he is a graduate of Amherst College, University of Chicago Law School, and Harvard Medical School, and has been dean of the medical schools at both Yale University and the University of California, San Francisco. Also, he served as Chief Science Officer of the White House COVID response team under President Joe Biden. He's the author of several books, including New York Times bestsellers, The End of Overeating, Capture, Hijacked, Fast Carbs, Slow Carbs, and A Question of Intent. Dr. Kessler is an expert on dietary topics and public health and just released his new book, which we'll be discussing this evening, Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, The New Science of Achieving a Healthy Weight. Anahad O'Connor is a health columnist who writes about food and nutrition for the Washington Post's Well and Being desk. Anahad joined the Post in 2022. Before that, he was a staff reporter for the New York Times, where he spent 2 decades covering health and science. Anahad also spent time on the Times Metro, Politics, and Breaking News desks. He began his journalism career at the New York Times after graduating from Yale University, where he earned his degree in psychology with a focus on neuroscience. Anahad started a popular weekly science column and regularly writes about the food industry's hidden influence on scientific research. In 2018, Anahad was part of a team that won an award from the Association of Healthcare Journalists for the groundbreaking investigative series Planet Fat, which examined the food industry's role in global spread of obesity. Anahad has written 4 books, including 2 bestsellers, Never Shower in a Thunderstorm, and The 10 Things You Need to Eat. He was born and raised in New York City and now resides in the Bay Area with his wife, Tessama. Is that correct? Tessame. Oh, a women's rights lawyer and their 2 children. Welcome, Dr. Kessler and Mr. O'Connor. So,
Dr. Kessler, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for you doing this.
Well, the book was very exhaustive, covered a lot of ground, but I want to cut right to the chase because we're in the midst of a crisis nowadays. We have 3/4 of the population that's overweight or obese. We have an explosion of chronic diseases, food-related chronic diseases, like type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, heart disease, cancers, food-related chronic diseases. And we're seeing these diseases increasingly in children, type 2 diabetes. I read a case report of a 5-year-old who was diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So my question is, how did we get here?
You summed it up pretty well. Right? So about 2.5 years ago, I had the privilege of doing Operation Warp Speed. And I found myself at the end of that, some 676 million vaccines, a pretty intense period for all of us. I found myself about 40 pounds heavier. And I had written about food, right? And what was going on, right? So I wanted to understand about weight. And what is this mystery about weight? And during the course of that, we all knew that weight is not good for us, right? And that's generally accepted. We always knew it was a risk factor. Right? But what we didn't know was that it was causal. Right? So medicine is waking up, cardiology, nephrology, endocrinology, right? That when you just what you mentioned, cardiac disease, renal disease, metabolic disease, about a dozen forms of cancer, maybe some of the neurodegenerative diseases, as a cause, right? What's at that cause? But the important point is this is not about weight. We got it wrong, right? So if obesity, if translates into weight, to BMI, it's not BMI that's driving this. I think what we have come to understand, and certainly in the course of researching and writing this, that the real culprit is this thing called visceral fat. Right? It's, a medical term. Visceral just means of the organs, of the viscera in the abdomen. Right? So BMI measures weight, bones, muscle, fat, different kinds of fat, subcutaneous fat in our arms, fats in our legs, right? But there's something about, fat in these fat cells. When they get too much fat, they hold fat, and that's good. But you consume, you overstuff these cells in essence, and they start leaking out these fatty acids. And they start leaking out not only these fatty acids, but what scientists call adipokines and chemokines and these pro-inflammatory molecules. Now, where do these free fatty acids go when these fat cells start leaking it out? Well, they start going in places where there's not supposed to be fat, where the body wasn't designed to have fat. So they start going into your liver, right? The fat, you talked about fatty liver. That fatty liver then spills out more, free fatty acids. It gets into your pancreas. It gets into layers of your heart, right? And these, fat cells are metabolically active, right? And they basically, there's this inflammatory soup, that the organs are bathing in. So we're waking up to the fact that, at the cause of much of chronic disease, right, is this visceral fat. So BMI, weight's not going to tell you what probably the best proxy for visceral fat. You can actually go do a DEXA scan. I know people think about DEXA scans, and bones and osteoporosis, but it also can tell you, it can measure fat composition, and waist circumference, and it varies. People leak out the threshold for when these fatty acids get leaked out of these fat cells varies from individual to individual, population to population. Different populations, start leaking it out. You can have a BMI even 18, 19, 20, and still have this, this release of free fatty acids, that causes this, this inflammatory soup that causes this, what Jerry Reven back in 1980s, called, insulin resistance. That was called metabolic syndrome. But what he didn't figure out at the time was he saw this pattern of metabolic abnormalities, but he didn't have the CAT scan images to CAT scan the abdomen, so he didn't realize it was visceral fat that was at the center of it. So now we have, we turn around, right? That beer belly, right? That is part of the American culture. It's not cool. It ends up killing us, right? And so it is profound. And I think American Heart Association starts talking about CKM disease, cardiac kidney metabolic disease. And so who owns that disease? Which specialty? Who's going to take care of all these patients? What do we do about it, and what caused it?
I remember talking to a researcher once who studies non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's a mouthful. And he said that decades ago, he would talk to surgeons who performed abdominal surgeries on people. And during the pre-surgery sort of questions, they would ask people, do you drink? How much alcohol do you consume? They'd go through their sort of history of their lifestyle behaviors. And they would cut open patients and see these fatty, marbled livers in patients who told them that they didn't drink. And they would think, this person's clearly an alcoholic. They have an alcoholic, fatty liver. Why is this patient lying? And they would see a number of these patients, and that's when they started to realize that there was this, this disease decades ago.
And the names changed. I mean, right? It's no longer non-alcoholic, fatty liver disease, steatotic. It's metabolic associated hepatic dysfunction. It's now MASH.
Absolutely,
right?
And it's no longer, unfortunately, just in children. Adults, it's in children now too.
Right.
It's really shocking.
I mean, it's as simple as if you want to know probably the primary biochemical abnormalities. I mean, that liver fat, that also that fat in that pancreas, that is, those are the stressors that end up being responsible for much of type 2 diabetes.
And this is a recent occurrence. I mean, it's only in the past. I think the term was coined maybe 3 or 4 decades ago at the Mayo Clinic. So the question is, why did this suddenly start happening? Why did we have this explosion of metabolic disease?
The reason why this visceral adiposity occurs, I think there's great discussion, great debate, in the nutrition community. I think it's 2 primary reasons, right? There's no doubt that it's excess energy intake, right? We're filling up these fat cells more than they can hold. So, and that is more calories in than calories burned, right? But it's not only the fact that it's excess calories. It is, I think the composition of the food also is adding, but sorting that out, right? So if you just, excess calories in are going to overstuff these fat cells, right? You overstuff these fat cells, right? You have fatty liver disease. What does that do? Well, that actually delays clearance of insulin. So you have elevated insulin levels, right? But if you eat food that is high, with rapidly absorbable glucose, rapidly absorbable fructose, where you're just, basically highly palatable, highly processed, food that just in essence, you just look at the pharmacokinetic curve, not to get overly scientific, but the rate of rise of the glucose into the bloodstream, because you take the food, you take out all the structure, you process. The food's processed. It has no structure, rapidly absorbable glucose, right? But you can put on a CGM and you can watch your glucose. But what we don't measure, it's much harder, is, your glucose starts going up because of you're absorbing all that glucose. But what's actually also going on? Your pancreas has to work harder because your pancreas wants to release insulin to keep that glucose down. So you may be looking and say, oh, my glucose looks normal, right? But that doesn't mean your insulin may be working harder. So if you look over the last 2 decades, and very few people I think have picked up on this, there's been a doubling in the level of the insulin levels, and we are about 50% of the population is hyperinsulinemic, right? And what does that mean? You get stuck in this vicious cycle. This hyperinsulinemia causes increased fat storage, decreased insulin clearance, increased inflammatory molecules, and this drives this. Both an abnormal lipid pattern, the atherosclerosis, of heart disease, of type 2 diabetes. So, if we can just you know, I mean, this is, you know, if we can just stop eating, right? This mantra, not in time, we need food, right? But, you know, the mantra had been, you know, eat less, exercise more, but it didn't work. It was the absolute failure. And so the question is, why couldn't we do it, right? I mean, in the end, you have to be, if you want to reduce that liver fat, I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, Roy Taylor, I mean, you know, wonderful British physician. I mean, it's very simple. He shows the CAT scan images. That fatty liver, right? You take somebody, you reduce their caloric intake. He can show you, he can clear out the fat in that liver. I mean, but you have to get the calorie level down. But no one could get the calorie level down. So why not? Why did I always gain back this weight, right? So I could do 676 million vaccines, right? I could run the FDA, I could do 2 medical schools, but I couldn't keep the weight off, right? Right? So what is it that's I mean, why couldn't I do that, right? I mean, you know, don't tell me about willpower. I mean, I could, right? And, you know, you've written about this. I mean, you know, eloquently and, you know, with great depth. You know, we started around 2008, 2009. You know, the first book at the end of Overeating, that really looked at, you know, fat and sugar, fat and salt, fat, sugar, and salt. I mean, you know, we had the privilege of doing tobacco. I mean, when I was at the agency, and you know, the question was nicotine addictive, and I, you know, went to my friends at National Institute of Drug Abuse, and the key test for addiction is whether rats will press a lever, right? Whether they'll work for it. It's variable reinforcement. You know, there are these measures. It's basically, you know, these rats pressing a lever in getting these doses of nicotine. And they always had in the other bottle, they always, you know, had, you know, glucose or sucrose. And I said, what about, why are you using that, glucose or sucrose? And they don't want to talk about that. It was always talk about, you know, nicotine was addictive. But, I mean, if you go look, you know, certainly glucose, I mean, is highly reinforced. I mean, it's self-administered. And when, you know, we did the experiments, when you add fat to that, it's synergistic. People will, you know, so, you know, back, you know, I mean, you really want to go back where this started. I don't know where you think. Back, what, the 1920s and 1930s, in order to feed, you know, an emerging, you know, a hungry, you know, nation where people increasingly industrialized, lived in cities, right? We needed to ship food over longer distances, more shelf stable. You didn't have to cook everything yourself. And in order to cook everything, you know, to have food that stayed from, you know, didn't spoil in a day or two, that you can ship. They figured out how to process food and take out the hydration, right? But I mean, that required the industrialization of food in order to keep that food shelf stable. And in order to do that, I mean, they also had to dial in palatability, right? So they you know, the food industry will simply say, hey, I'm just giving consumers what they want. I mean, we're just making food pleasurable. Of course they're making food pleasurable. They design food for, you know, that bliss point, right? And they take out, in order, you know, for, I mean, in processing, you take out any structure, you take out any, you know, I mean, take out all the water. So you're concentrating. And they have, you know, they can take this food to very high temperatures, I mean, through extrusion processing, and they can dial in, you know, fat and sugar, fat and salt, fat, sugar, and salt. And what did we do? We put it on every corner, made it available 24/7, made it socially acceptable to eat any time. You know, it's like we're eating, you know, in a food carnival. You can't go more than 10 feet and there not be some food. What did we think was going to happen? And no one asked, I mean, even when we did the food label, which I thought we did a good job, right? I mean, labeling what was in the food. No one asked the the question is, what's the effect of that fat, sugar, and salt biologically? What is it going to do to our metabolism? And so we missed that question. And so you start looking at the blood glucose, you start looking at the blood insulin, and you end up, there you go, we ended up with enormous amounts of visceral fat, and that's how we got to this epidemic.
So clearly,
did I get that right?
I would say so. So clearly, it's the food that's driving this. There's a lot of factors, but food seems to be a main driving. Our food has changed dramatically.
It's not. Food can't be the enemy. Food is not the enemy.
Well, it's what's done to our food, and I thought that's.
So keep on going.
I thought that was what was fascinating about.
I call it in the book ultra formulated foods.
Right.
Right. Generally it's referred to as highly processed, ultra processed.
Yeah.
Right. Why do the distinction a little nuanced? Right. The fact is, I don't think it's when I think about processing generally, you think about the preservatives, the emulsifiers, the stabilizers.
Okay.
To me, it's the fat on fat, fat on sugar, fat on salt, right, that is driving that palatability. Now, there's two sets of circuits, understand, right? You have the circuits in the brain, all the circuits, right? That are key, that are fat and sugar, fat and salt. That's self-administration. That's highly reinforcing because it's affecting the reward centers of our brain, right? So there's an effect on the addictive circuits, but there's also, because it's processed and because there's this rapid absorption of the glucose, and the absorption of fructose, that's also affecting the metabolic circuits. So we're getting it from both ends. We're getting it, right, the palatability is causing the food, the addictive qualities of the food. We should talk about it, what we mean about addiction. But it's also causing this metabolic chaos, right, because it's feeding this hyperinsulinemia.
Well, and I think that, we all recognize that there's a lot of fat, salt, and sugar in our foods, but I've written a lot about ultra-processed foods, ultra-formulated foods, and the question I often get from our readers at the Post is, well, what exactly is ultra-processed food? Is it just something with a lot of salt, sugar, and fat? And I did a deep dive for answers, and your last book, Fast Carbs, Slow Carbs, I think did a really good job of explaining that it's not just what we're adding to the food, but taking away from it. And when you look at the ingredient list on a bag of tortilla chips, nacho tortilla chips, and it says corn flour, it doesn't tell you how it's been degraded and what's happened in the food manufacturing facility, where you take a grain like corn and you strip away the fiber, you strip away the core that has the vitamins and the minerals and the protein, and then you're left with this starchy endosperm that's just basically refined carbs. And they don't stop there. They then take that, they grind it up into flour, they put it into these machines that you talked about in your last book called extrusion machines, which most of us don't know about because we don't have them in our kitchens at home. But the food manufacturers, they take this flour, they put it in the extrusion machines, they subject it to these high temperatures and high pressures that you would never use at home in your kitchen, and you're basically melting the food down, you're degrading the food matrix, and it's turned into this melt or extrudite that's then pushed through the machine, and it's can be molded into a tortilla chip or into a puff that you would give your child.
A Fruit Loop.
Fruit Loops, cereals, all these foods that we know and love that we just think of as, oh, it's made from flour. No, it's been degraded and melted down. And you introduce this term that I think is so important, pre-digested. We're eating a lot of foods that are pre-digested. So
Baby food,
yeah. By the time it hits our mouth, it basically just melts down because there's no fiber, there's no nutrients. It goes
down in a whoosh.
Goes down in a whoosh.
But what's
and
the biological effect of that food?
Well, my background is in psychology, and I remember very vividly, studying addictive drugs, and what makes them potent and addictive is how quickly they're absorbed and how quickly they hit the brain. And that's what we've done to our food. It's just digested rapidly. There's nothing to reach the gut microbiome at the end of the digestive
So
tract.
you have the highly palatable, highly energy dense foods.
So we get the flavors.
You get the flavors. You got the signatures, the flavors, right? But you have the energy density, the fat and sugar that's packed into it. But again, you're triggering the addictive circuits, but you're also at the same time giving this rush because you've taken the structure out of the food. The structure slow down the absorption through the gut. So there's these rapid glucose spikes, and it's not just these rapid glucose spikes. I mean, it's this elevated insulin to deal with those rapid glucose spikes. So you're getting this double whammy. You're getting the metabolic effects of processed foods, as well as you're getting the effects on the reward system. And the reward system keeps me going, right? Now, we've used the term. I think it's important to understand that. When I did the end of overeating, I didn't use the term addiction, right? I was careful. I called it conditioned hyper-eating, right? The reward centers. But, that book and a lot of others stimulated a lot of research over the last 15 years. When we tend to think of the word addiction, we think of it's something for the weak. It's for the downtrodden. But I think that we need to change how we think about addiction. Those addictive circuits are in all of us. If you go back thousands of years, the reasons our brains evolved the way they did with these circuits, right, was in an environment of scarcity, right? In order to survive, which animals survived? Those that had the ability to focus their attention on the most salient stimuli and find energy-dense food, right? So, they could detect these cues, right? And this cue-induced wanting, right? That bird flying over could identify of all the stimuli in the environment where the food would be and would learn, to the brain. You have the cue. It could be a sight, it could be a smell, it could be the time of day, right? It could be 10 o'clock at night. You get this cue. You start thinking about it. You have these thoughts of wanting, right? And if you try to resist, that goes into this craving. You switch from an environment of scarcity to an environment of abundance, and your brain is just now, you put energy-dense foods on every corner, right? So what did we think would happen, right? It's not that our brains, there's something wrong with our brains. If anything, our brains are working too well. We've changed the environment to add all this energy-dense food, this fat and sugar, fat and salt, right? And we made it socially acceptable. So we're getting triggered. There's this cue-induced wanting. There's this craving. And, the other key component, and it took me a while to figure this out. But in addiction, there's relapse. And the reason I'd lose weight, I thought I was done, right? And I would gain it back, and all that is relapse, right? Because the addictive circuits are there, the environment is there. There's only we can all lose weight, but it's like, you're wearing a life preserver. You ever try to hold that life preserver underwater? There's only a certain amount of time that you can exert that force, right? And that life preserver will come back up, right? And so those addictive circuits are there. So, yes, there's metabolic adaptation. That accounts when you lose weight for some, of the regain, but your appetite, comes back pretty strongly because the addictive circuits are there. So if anything, now with these new drugs, right? The one thing we can be sure of, these new drugs work through biology, right? They work through pharmacology, and they should be, they should end this debate. This is not a question of willpower. The only choice we really have, I think, we talk, is a choice if we want to do something about it. And the reason I wrote this book was, you've been writing a couple of decades, we've been, you can talk about obesity in this food environment is probably one of the great public health failures, right? I mean, because we've not changed it. So what do you do with this visceral adiposity? This is making us truly ill. Average person gains 2 pounds a year between their 20s and 40s. We should be all living longer, decrease in cigarettes, smoking, statins, et cetera. But you really, if this doesn't compromise, these chronic conditions don't make you live less long necessarily, but certainly 4, 5, 6 years of disability. I mean, of those additional years, that we're living now compared to 40, 50 years are spent in disability because of these chronic diseases, right? So the reason I wrote the book was, what do you do? I mean, is there anything you can do about health to reduce this visceral adiposity and keep weight off and not wait for the food environment, to miraculously to change, so then my brain will change about the food environment. What do you do in the meantime?
Right. Well, I think you point out that, there's nothing wrong with our reward circuitry. It's operating as it evolved to operate. It's that we also have these, cues that usually tell us when to stop eating, when we've had enough. And our food has been designed in a way to override those cues. You talked about, the ultra processing of food and how the fiber is removed, the water is removed, and so the food's absorbed rapidly. And one thing that happens is that we're not getting the food toward the end of our gut, where our gut microbiome is, which helps to produce these satiety signals like GLP-1 is, a compound that our gut helps to produce and sends a signal to our brain to stop eating. And now we have the introduction of these GLP-1 drugs, which you write about in the book. You've been very open about how you started taking one, and I was curious to get your thoughts on the perception of these drugs as a wonder drug. Are they really a wonder drug? Is this the answer to this obesity epidemic? And what's been your personal experience with the GLP-1 drug?
So after Warp Speed, find myself 40 pounds heavier than I was before I started Warp Speed. I started losing weight the way I, always did in the past, but it was going a little slower. I found myself after a number of weeks, just in the local emergency room, right? Because I had a kidney stone, right? And they drew some blood, in the ER, and I had an elevated calcium, right? And why did I have an elevated calcium? It didn't make sense. So I go see an endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist says, I'm doing, one of the clinical trials, on one of the anti-obesity drugs. My blood's at that point, like 40 pounds heavier. I'm pre-diabetic. Weight's not coming off as rapidly as it used to. And I'm writing this book on weight. So I say, go ahead.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing, right? And, so the answer is these drugs are highly effective, right? They are very powerful. They are potentially dangerous. They are one tool, but they are only one tool, and we don't know how to use them wisely, and we need to figure that out. Let me start by just going over how I think they work. And first of all, we're all different. Okay, we all have different responses. Understand, when the initial experiments were done on these drugs 2 decades ago with the early molecules, and again at different doses, when they injected these drugs into laboratory animals, Dan Drucker described this as the animals didn't move. Right? They coined a term called visceral malaise. Right? Just this, feeling of this, this unease, malaise, because animals didn't, he couldn't get them. Again, different doses. But what we do know now is these drugs delay gastric emptying. So what do I mean by that? I mean, they slow down the motility in the stomach. Now that does two things, right? It slows down the absorption of glucose, right? Because if the glucose will get absorbed, after the stomach, right? So if you keep food in the stomach longer, it delays that rapid rise, right? But it also, when you keep food in your stomach longer, and again, it varies. How does that make you feel? We've all had that experience, right? Exactly. It makes you feel bloated, right? But you ever have the flu? Your gut stops, moving organs, and you lose your appetite, right? You ever have food poisoning, right? Food poisoning. So there is this spectrum of we feel full, we're satiated, we feel satisfied. Then there's Thanksgiving fullness. Right? Right? And then I can push you to the edge of nausea, right? And then and in some people, I can push you over that edge of nausea to emotional distress. Now, what's strong enough to overcome the addictive circuits? Addictive circuits are highly powerful, they're ingrained, they're there, that cue-induced wanting, right? What will what will shut off that addictive circuits? We know these drugs affect both the gut, they delay gastric emptying, they also affect that delayed gastric emptying is through an area of the brain, the hindbrain, the area postrema, the NTS, nuclear tract solitarius. That's part of the aversive system of the body. And that's what's slowing down gastric emptying to deal with food poisons, others, right? That is that's the vomit center of the brain. So you certainly have part of the reaction, and it's going to vary from individual to individual. But for me, at least, when I took these drugs, first of all, I had these intense chills, right? I didn't quite understand it. I wrote to the company and said, what's going on here, right? What are these? They didn't know, right? And the scientists who study this in laboratory animals, when they also find you give these drugs and you can when you do these experiments and they're blinded, they actually they could tell which animal got the drug because they just would feel the tail if the tail was cold, right? So you have these certainly changes in thermogenesis probably going on, but what it did is just pushed me to the edge of nausea, right? So what you have is you have the addictive circuits, and then you have these aversive circuits, right? These satiety circuits. So you push me to the edge of nausea. I'm not going to want to eat. You're not getting rid of the addictive circuits, but you're keeping food in my stomach longer, right? Now, so I think now we're going to learn more about how these drugs work. Are there certain upstream effects directly on the reward system? Scientists are debating that, but clearly some of the mechanism of action of this, these adverse reactions, are the way the drug works in part, right? And they're highly effective, right? But whether it's diet or drugs or surgery, they all work through the same way. They got to work through, one central way, right? They got you to eat less. They shut down appetite, right? So they all work through that mechanism. They they counterbalance these addictive pathways. And the other thing that concerns me is when you play around with appetite, you shut down appetite. How much are people on these drugs eating? And there's not very good data, right? But there are many people, the data that I could see, some people are eating less than 1,000 calories, some eating 600, 800 calories. Now that's the stuff of semi-starvation, right? And during bariatric surgery, we built these teams of people. There was a great deal of morbidity and mortality associated to take care of people who were on 600, 800 calories. We didn't do that here. Now, again, I think it can be done safely, but it has to be done under good care, right? You can't just, hand this out to people, on telemedicine, and let people do this without good care. But they are highly effective. They work, right? They shut down appetite. And the genius of the companies is they were able to adjust the dose, so that they will push you to that edge of nausea, but they don't push you over. Now, some people they push over, and then that nausea can go away. But if you look, the premise of the companies is, is that these drugs, we don't. Well, they only work when you take them. No, right? But the premise is people are going to stay on these for life. Because if you have the addictive circuits, but you're on blood pressure for life medicines, you're on Lipitor medicines. Well, we're really not. People aren't great taking medicine. But if you look at the data, people are on these drugs on an average of 8 to 9 months, and then they go off. So what's going to happen, right? People are going to lose a lot of weight. They're going to take this 8 to 9 months. Now, they go off for a number of reasons. It's too expensive, adverse reactions, just don't want to be on drugs. I bet, 6, 7 months, I had some abdominal pains. I just didn't want to continue, right? And I wasn't sure it was related to the drug or not. But, when you go off this, the data show that you gain back the weight. So we're going to turn around in 3, 4, 5 years, and people will take this for 8, 9 months, and they're going to gain back the weight, and we're going to say this was one grand big failure because everyone gained back the weight. So what do? We have this disease. This chronic. Much of our chronic diseases. I don't want to spend my senior years in disability, right? I want to limit, the amount of heart failure, liver failure, transplantation. You want to avoid that, right? And so we got to figure out, and I think, my old agency has to do a better job of communicating the pharmaceutical companies' feet to the fire to how to use these drugs in the real world and how we can figure out how to use these. But, what's the trick here? For me, what I had to do is, in the end, what's wrong with this picture? You have one industry making billions of dollars making us sick. Fair?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're not going to disagree with that?
I totally agree. And then another industry.
Making billions of dollars to treat what the former industry does. So if you were from Mars and you came down and said, what's wrong with this picture, right? You would say, go fix the underlying problem, right? We have to figure out how to use these drugs wisely. And that's why when, I think the answer to your question is they are one tool, but in the end, look, I think food addiction is driving this epidemic, right? Dysregulated appetite is driving this epidemic. The food we're eating, again, this ultra-formulated, ultra-processed, energy-dense food is driving this epidemic. I think these drugs, we can crack food addiction. We can, while you're on this, but in the end, you got to change your relationship with food. So what did I have to do? If I understand, if I'm on these drugs, right, and I don't want to put more food into my stomach, I have to condition myself to eat differently. Right, so I'm on these drugs. I want to eat. I don't want to put more food in my stomach, so I want to eat smaller amounts. I don't want to eat energy-dense food because I'm going to feel good. So I change how I eat. So I got to learn how to. The hope is to use that experience while you're on these drugs. If you want to go off these drugs or reduce the dose or whatever, can you recondition your brain to, have a different relationship? So when you're off these drugs, I don't want that energy dense food. I want smaller amounts of food, right? But the question then becomes, how long will that that retrain my brain? Will that retraining occur? Because I just don't want to. I'll get sick if I put anything more in my stomach when I'm on these drugs. So I retrain my brain. I change my relationship with food, and maybe for some people may stay on these drugs for a lifetime. Some people may stay. Go off these drugs and gain back the weight. But I think, for me, I would go off these drugs, I tried to, retrain my brain. It's easier said than done because you still have these addictive circuits, right? But then, I would go back on the drugs to get another boost of, recondition myself, right, to have this aversive, signal, right? But we have to figure out how to use these drugs wisely.
So, is this the answer then? Should people, 3 out of 4 adults are overweight or obese. Should people, who should go on these drugs? Who should, go on them to train their brains? Is it possible? It sounds like in the book you said people go on these drugs, they lose a lot of weight quickly, but when they go off them,
there's no
the curve of weight gain is even steeper than weight loss. They regain the weight so fast. So it sounds like, if you put people back in this environment where they have no protection against,
and when you lose weight, you're losing not only fat, not only viscera, you're losing muscle, right? And when you gain it back, you gain back, fat before you gain back muscle. So do you end up worse off? Look.
So we still need to address food.
Well, we absolutely need to address food, but what do you do while we're addressing? You work on the food environment, right? You get that into shape. But the fact is, if I'm sitting there and I'm a male and my waist circumference is greater than 40 inches, right? Or female or 35 or whatever the correlate is, and it depends on different populations. South Asians, for example, have insulin resistance at at much lower BMIs in waist circumference. I think if we can reclaim our health. I think these drugs. I just want people to know about certainly my experience and what I could tell scientifically. I think they are an important tool, right? But they're only one tool, right? But I think if you're sitting there with visceral adiposity, right? This is not for some cosmetic reason, although I'm not here to judge, right? And if I can get that visceral adiposity down, that visceral adiposity is killing us. So we got to be able to treat that, right? And I think we can, but it requires good care.
Well, in the book, you say that we have to be willing to take on the food industry. We need a real food revolution. And certainly we've had some changes in the federal government lately.
You've noticed? I've
noticed. I think a lot of people have noticed this MAHA movement. Is that the revolution? Is this, is this going to address the underlying, the root cause of what's going on here, which is what happened to our food?
So RFK,
Your thoughts? I saw today that.
Are you in your reporter role or your columnist role? Are you allowed to?
Both.
You're both. You can be. Are you allowed to have an opinion, or you have to be neutral?
Absolutely, I can have opinions. Yeah.
You want to go first?
I'll let you go first. It's your book.
So he's right to identify food. Okay. He got the food part right. Right. He certainly struck I think a real chord on a populist chord on chronic disease, right? I think that what he's focused on food dyes and seed oil, however laudable that might be, it's not going to affect, it's not going to affect the problem that we're talking about.
If you take the food dyes out of Fruit Loops, they're still Fruit Loops.
Right. You're still going to end up with ultra processed food that in excess calories, right? So I don't think he has it right, and I am very concerned that everything on vaccines, everything they're doing to biomedical research, is so destructive. That it's very hard. It's very hard to say anything positive. In this environment where they are. I had the privilege of doing Warp Speed, beginning January 20th, 2021. Trump's greatest accomplishment, first term, and I will say it, was Warp Speed. I mean, I have enormous praise for my predecessors. I work with them, right? I mean, most of them stayed on, and we got the job done, and we all got to the other side. His greatest accomplishment. It wasn't because we were smarter we were able to do that. It's because we had invested over the last 50 years in an scientific infrastructure, right, that allowed Warp Speed to do its work, right? We had the biomedical science, we had the technology, we had the NIH, right? We had the FDA, we had that infrastructure. That's why Warp Speed worked, right? They are destroying that infrastructure, right? And we can't do Warp Speed again, right? And that I just don't understand.
You know, you say in the book that consumers need to know what's in their food and what it's doing to their health.
Correct.
And you were at the FDA when the current nutrition labels that we have went into effect.
Right.
Are nutrition labels telling us enough about our food? And, you know, if you could redesign those labels or talk to RFK and the folks working on this, what would you say? How would you redesign those labels?
I think that label was Act One. I mean, I think it was, I didn't realize we were awarded the Presidential Design Award, by all the design. I mean, why? And what they realized was in a small amount of space, we conveyed a lot of information. So there's a limit to how much information you could, but that was what was in the food. What was missing was the effect of that food on the body, right? And I think for every food, you're not going to be able to put more information on the packet. Yes, you're going to need to put more information on the front, what's actually in the food. Just list the first 3 ingredients and see whether, if it's tomato paste and the first 3 ingredients are not tomatoes, there's something amiss here, right? So I think we could do a better job on front of package labeling, but I think there should be a dossier that's in the public domain, right, that explains what the processing steps are in the food and what it's doing, what that processing and the effects are, on, certain basic parameters like glucose, like insulin, right, and what effect that's having on the body. Look, labeling is important not only for consumers, labeling is important because it shapes the industry. And if they have to disclose certain things they don't want to disclose, it changes their practice, right? So, we just got to ask the effect, people, what's the effect of all this processing on some of this biology? Make those dossiers publicly available, make them collect that data, right? Make that publicly available. You're not going to put all that science, on the package. But once that becomes in the public domain, then you write about it. I could look it up on a QR code. The industry, wants to change. It will change its practices. So I think there is a whole food label 2.0 that they could do if they wanted.
Okay. So that was something, right? Great information. So our thanks today to Dr. David Kessler and Anahad O'Connor. We also thank our audience here as well as those listening online. This meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, commemorating the 120th year of enlightened discussion, is adjourned. Thank you.